Yes, contingencies can make or break a real estate deal. The way I like to remember it is, a contingency is something that needs to happen in order for the transaction to continue. There's a lot of different people involved because it depends on the contingency, because there can be more than one contingency within the process of buying or selling within one transaction. Some of the main ones are home inspection, the home appraisal. Another one is a home sale contingency. Now that's when it's done. It's brought up by the buyers when they bring in the offer, and then the sellers could agree to it. They could counter it, or they can just cancel it altogether. Where does this take place? It starts off on a piece of paper, so those appear in the written contract. Why do we have contingencies? It's a little different for buyers than it is sellers. How this is done, again, this is going to depend on what type of contingency it is, of course. Welcome to The Real Yasharika, my real side in all things real estate. I'm Yasharika, and today's Formula Friday is going to be about contingencies and how they can make or break a deal. So I'm going to get into my 5 W's, the 5 W's and how, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. And then we are going to talk about the POV, so the point of views on how that works towards buyers, sellers, and agents. So let's get started. So as I mentioned before, yes, contingencies can make or break a real estate deal, okay? So first thing we're going to do is we are going to start with who is involved. There's a lot of different people involved because it depends on the contingency, because there can be more than one contingency within the process of buying or selling within one transaction. So you are going to have, the buyers and the sellers, their agents, and the lender. Again, that's going to depend on which I will get to that later on in the video. But if we are talking about who, again, who depends on what type of contingency it is. But these things are typically done, in the process of buying or selling a home. So that's when the offer comes in, and when both parties signed, it becomes a contract, and so the contingencies are going to be agreed upon within that written offer that becomes the contract. So when it comes to the written offer and the contract, that's going to start off with the buyer and the seller and their agents, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. Now, what is a contingency? Now, a contingency is a condition that must be met for a real estate contract to move forward. So the way I like to remember it is, a contingency is something that needs to happen in order for the transaction to continue, okay? So some of the main ones are home inspection, okay, and the home appraiser. The home appraisal, if you have a lender, they are going to want that appraisal done by an appraiser to come out and look at the property and determine the home value, because that's going to determine how much money they give you towards that loan. For the property for buyers. So in that case, when you have the appraisal done, then that's going to be, on the buyer. Their lender is going to ask for that. So the buyer's lender is going to ask for the appraiser to come out and do the appraisal. So that's 3 people right there for that. And then for the home inspection, that's going to be between the buyer and their inspector. So that's another person that's involved, because that's a different type of contingency. Another one is a home sale contingency. Now that's going to be on the buyer. So sometimes buyers are buying, they're looking to buy a new home while they're in the process of selling their old home. So that's a home sale contingency, and that's definitely something that needs to be mentioned, because that's going to be a part of their financing. So usually when that's brought on, it can be a waiting game, because they are looking to sell their home first before they buy the seller's home. So that is a type of contingency. That's something that needs to be done in order for the transaction to continue. So they can't continue to buy one property until the old property is sold. So that's an example that's another type of contingency, the home sale contingency. Again, same thing for an appraisal and a home inspection. So for an appraisal, that's something that typically needs to be done. In terms of the lender, they are going to want that appraisal to be done before they can say, okay, yeah, we can work out something to get the clients this home, because sometimes it has to be negotiated, because the offer may be, let's say it's higher than what the, what the buyer offers is higher than the home value that the appraisal came to. The lender isn't going to go, higher. They're not going to go much higher than that. So sometimes the buyers may have to come out of pocket, if that's, if the seller isn't going to accept lower or whatever the case may be. In terms of the lender, they're not going to continue without that appraisal. So, but then, even with the appraisal, again, in my example, if the offer was higher than that appraisal and, the sellers aren't going to budge on anything lower because, that's already what you offered, then sometimes the buyer may have to come out of pocket. So that's why it's a type of contingency, because it's, it's something that needs to happen in order to continue. But sometimes things can go on within that contingency that makes the process not continue. So, it's just one of those things that could go either way. All right, so when does this happen? As I said before, this is going to happen once, the buyers come along. If you're selling a home, once the buyers come into the picture, or once you come into the picture to buy a home, and you put in an offer, once the buyers start writing the offers, and it becomes a contract, once the seller signs it, that's when the contingencies come into play. But you start working towards the contingencies once the offer is signed by the seller. So once both parties sign, both the buyer and the seller, then you start working towards that contingency. But it's first brought up in the offer. The buyers are going to put, what contingencies they are going to include. So, the home inspection, their financing information. So that's whether they are a cash buyer or are they working with a lender. So yeah, the financing, the home inspection, the appraisal, and if they have a home sale contingency. Now there are some other things, but those are some of the main ones. And some of these things could vary by state as well. So I'm not going to speak too much on it, but yeah, those are some of the main contingencies. And yeah, that's when it's done. It's brought up by the buyers when they bring in the offer, and then the sellers could agree to it. They could counter it, or they can just cancel it altogether. Now typically that's done if they have like multiple offers. If they have a lot, some of them they may not give the time of day. You never know. But yes, all of these things are taken care of before the deal closes overall. Before you get to the closing table, all of these things have to be worked out. Again, as I mentioned in the last example, if for whatever reason the buyers come out of pocket, that's a decision that has to be made before you reach the closing. Before you reach the closing table, that may be something that comes up. But, overall, all of those things have to be taken care of in order to continue, in order to get to that closing table. So you have to have all of that stuff figured out before closing takes place and the actual buying and the selling of the property takes place. Where does this take place? As I mentioned before, that takes place within the offer, starting when the buyers bring in the offers, and then once it's signed by the seller as well, once both parties are signed, buyers and sellers, then it becomes the contract. But it starts off on a piece of paper, and that's going to determine what's done within the real estate process, within the process of buying or selling. So it's going to tell you again if there is going to be a home inspection, appraisal, and all of those things and whatnot. So those appear in the written contract. So why is this done? Why contingencies? Why do we have contingencies? It's a little different for buyers than it is sellers. So starting with buyers, this protects them from overpaying or buying a home with undiscovered issues. So again, the contingency, it depends on the contingency, on why it's done. So the first one I mentioned, protecting buyers from overpaying, that would be the appraisal, because the appraisal is going to be based off of the home value, the value of the property, the value of the home. And so that's what the lender is going to be basing it off of, because I do have another video where I talk about the difference between a listing price and a sales price. I talk about, the information that goes into those different pricings, because the listing price isn't always, the value of the property. Sometimes it's a strategic strategy at times, in terms of how the agents and the sellers are pricing these homes. So it's not always based on the actual value of the home. That's why these appraisals are done, to make sure that it's not, that the property isn't overpriced in terms of the actual value of it. So that's why in terms of the appraisal. Now for the home inspection, that fits in for the undiscovered issues, protecting buyers from the undiscovered issues, because if you waive a contingency, or if you waive that home inspection, then at that point you don't know, you risk the chances of there being issues with the home that may not, as noticeable to, people who aren't inspectors, or that just aren't available to the naked eye. Sometimes they have tools, you know inspectors, they typically have tools and whatnot that they use to check all of these things, especially roofings. They usually have like cameras or whatnot for that, to look at that, because you may be in the house and you're looking at it and you don't see any type of leakage, but they can see something from the camera that doesn't look right with the roofing or whatnot. And so if you waive that contingency, if you waive the home inspection, then you risk not knowing potential problems with the property. So those are why those contingencies are parts of the contract, to protect the buyers. Now for the sellers, contingencies within the contract can protect the sellers by knowing what's going on. So in terms of the deadlines and the expectations, because now if they know, because again, the buyers are going to come with these, they're going to come with their offer, and they're going to list what contingencies they are including in this offer. And so once the seller signs that, then now they should know what to expect, what they're getting themselves into. So if a home inspection is part of it, then they should know, okay, an inspector is going to be coming out to the house, they're going to be coming, looking at the property, and they're going to be determining and looking at to see what's wrong with the property, or if anything is wrong with the property. So now they can expect that, and they also can get a good look at the deadline, because sometimes timing is a factor to some people, to some sellers, to some buyers as well. But for sellers, since I'm on the topic of sellers right now, let's say you need to move quickly. Now that's going to be in the contract. So in their offer, the buyer should be telling you, how long they plan, how long this should be taking. The deadlines are very, very important overall, because if you don't meet these deadlines, issues come into play. So let's say the buyers put a week for the home inspection. So that means within that week, this is not just the time that the home inspector has to look at the house. In that 7-day period, the home inspector has to come and look at the house, and they also have to do their report. Okay, so their inspection report, it should be, most of the time nowadays, I believe, they're doing it digitally. That's how I've seen it recently, or, in paper form. But, there has to be some type of, something for you to see, for you to look at. Most of them, they should be having like pictures and stuff. If they see anything wrong, they should be having the pictures in there, and the statements saying, what's wrong with it. How, it can be different for different inspectors, but and you get what you pay for. Okay, sometimes you get what you pay for. So if you go with a lower one, you may not get all those high-tech fancy things. But yes, within that 7-day period, the inspector has to be out there. They have to do their report, and the buyers have to, the buyer and the seller have to pretty much come up with what's next and what's going to go on. So let's say if there aren't any problems, the home is in good condition, or it's just minor things that the buyers don't really want to bring up to the sellers, then y'all can move on. You may have it done before then. But if there are some problems with the home, and if there are problems with the home, then the buyer may need time to negotiate that with the seller, if there's something that they want the seller to fix before they move in, before the buyers move in. So you got to have time for that, and the seller has to have time to respond to whether they plan on fixing it or not. So, and then you have to figure out what you want to do. If you ask them to fix something and they say no, do you want to continue moving on with the property, or do you want to move on? You got to have time to do all of that. So when you say the home inspection period is, you plan on having that contingency of a home inspection, it is not just about, oh, this is the time, this is the window for the inspector to come out. So don't put a week on there, right? Don't put don't put a week on there and tell the inspector to come out the day before the deadline, because you need time. You need all the time you can get for that, but not too much time, because if you take too much time, if you have too much time written out on that offer, then they may not take you seriously, because they got things to do, they're ready to go. So you got to be strategic with the timing on that, on all your contingencies, as a matter of fact. But Yeah, that's just an example. That's just one. But again, for sellers, yes, deadline and expectations, that is what they are looking at when it comes to the offers and whether they agree to it or not, and whether, so whether they agree to it or not. So if they agree to it, then that's when it becomes the contract. If they don't agree to it, they've either declined it or they have, so they've either declined it fully or they did a counter offer where they may have changed some of the things kind of for you, but to see if you agree to. So let's say they send back the same thing, well, we'll agree to sell it to you for this price if you waive the home inspection. So if you agree to not do a home inspection, so something like that would be a counter offer. Anyway, for sellers, it's mainly about knowing the deadlines and knowing what to expect, what's going to be included in this process of buying or selling the home. Moving on to how. So how this is done, again, this is going to depend on what type of, contingency it is, of course. So if it's in home inspection, it has to be it has to be fulfilled by a home inspector, okay? If it's in appraisal, then that has to be fulfilled and done by an appraiser, a licensed appraiser. If it's the home sale contingency, then that has to be fulfilled by the buyer selling their previous home. If it's the financing between the lender, then the lender has to approve. The loan for that home, for that property. And again, now let me tell you, this is not the same as a pre-approval. A pre-approval is just that. It's a pre-approval. It's prior, okay? It's prior to the buyers coming in to buy this specific home. This is like your overall. It's overall. The pre-approval is a more overall thing, but once the buyers go into contract, once they write the offer and the offer is accepted by the seller, now they can, now they're under contract and now they're looking to, fully get this specific property. They have to do a separate application and apply, for that particular property to, to get that money to buy that particular property. So that's a separate process. That the financing is that has to be fulfilled by the lender. So again, all of these have to be, how they're done it depends on which one of the contingencies it is. Overall, if the contingencies is not met or something goes wrong, then that is a time to, either negotiate or cancel the deal overall. So that's pretty much how those contingencies work. Now, last but not least, let's get into the point of views on, how it looks and what's going on between buyers, sellers, and agents. So starting with buyers, this is a way to, protect you. Again, depending on which contingency it is. So if it's the home inspection, it's protecting, what you know about the house in terms of any issues. And then if it's the appraisal, it's kind of protecting you towards how much you are buying the property for, or, this is going to determine, how much the property is and how much you will be paying monthly for your mortgage and whatnot. So it's for that reason. It's also like a legal way to exit from the deal, because let me tell you, you cannot play around when it comes to these real estate transactions and buying or selling a home. These paperworks, listen, this legal stuff can get very, very tedious. So you want to be working really, really closely to an agent. I highly recommend that, because, you cannot just back out anytime, without certain consequences at certain times, with certain fees that you may have to pay if you back out for the wrong reasons, or, whatever the case may be. Again, some of these things are going to vary by location and will vary by state. So I won't get too specific on that, but don't say I didn't warn you. You don't want to be really trying to, hey, if you want to do it by yourself, that's fine. But listen, I don't even mess with that stuff no more. Like I'm a referral agent now. When I started off as a regular real estate agent, I was looking at that paperwork. I was like, sheesh, like maybe I should have got into law, because I'm like, us agents, like, we have to know almost just as much as the attorneys, but most of the times we're supposed to be, referring you out to the attorneys anyway in terms of those legal documentations. But it's serious, y'all. It's serious. It can be tedious. You can be locked in to something that you don't want to be locked into. So, make sure that you're paying attention to your surroundings, what's going on, what you're signing and whatnot, because it could be a serious thing. It could be a very serious thing. Also, these contingencies can be saving you money, again, depending on which ones it is. So the inspections and the appraisals are usually the ones that are saving you money. If it's the appraisal, sometimes it can be negotiated, and sellers, sometimes they're willing to come down based on, what the home value is, what the appraisal says. So that could be saving you money in terms of, what the payment is, what the price of the home is overall, and then what you'll be paying on a monthly basis. And then for the home inspection, that's going to be, a couple $100, but it could save you thousands if they find something major, like structure issues, problems with the roof, if the roof is leaking or something like that, stuff like that. Getting that home inspection could save you from an issue like that. You don't want to be stuck with a home like that, especially if you're looking for something that's move-in ready. You don't want a home that's coming with thousands of dollars worth of issues. So these contingencies could be saving you money. Sellers. So for you guys, you want to be working with your agents as well, so that you can know which one of these contingencies you could just accept, or the ones that you want to negotiate. Because as I mentioned before, sellers can do a counter offer. So you could ask them to waive the contingency, waive the home inspection, or something else, to take that out of the equation in the process of the buying and selling process. Just knowing what they are, what they mean, and just going from there. You got to kind of ask the right things. Like, I wouldn't ask them to waive financing, because not everybody is a cash buyer, so if they waive their financing, if they waive getting help from the lender, then you lose a buyer overall. Because I'm not everybody isn't a cash buyer. Everybody ain't got the money to completely buy out of pocket. So but just knowing what these contingencies are and what they mean. Most contingencies can expand the timing in terms of the process of buying and selling. So it may be a week, it may take an extra week within the process for the inspection, and whatnot. But all these contingencies, all of these are things that have to be done in the process. So that's going to determine, how fast or how slow it goes. Now, if an investor comes in and is willing to buy the property as is, then typically, that's going to be a faster process than someone who is buying the home to live in and is using a lender. That could take a little bit longer, because they may have to do those inspections, the appraisal, go over the underwriting process and all of that, and all of those type of things. So keep that in mind. Now, also, sellers, you can be using these contingencies strategically in order to attract these qualified buyers. So an example of that would be, as I said, it's going to start off with the buyers, right? So they're going to start off with the offer. But as I said before, you can counter it. And if you counter it, you can say that you're willing to pay for something for them, to help out the deal, sweeten the deal. A lot of times, I would say they're probably doing that. Sellers are probably doing that towards paying for the buyer's agent, because now that's not a required thing anymore. That used to be an automatic thing, but it's not anymore. But it is something that would definitely attract buyers, to know that that's something that they won't have to pay out of pocket, because there are a lot of other things that they are paying out of pocket and that they will be paying at the closing table. And so that would help them. Pretty much overall, it would be coming out of, the money that you're getting for the home, So if the home sold for $400,000, and the closing cost was $20,000, then, they may take that 20 out of that, and then you'll be left with, $380, depending on, your closing costs too and all of that stuff. But, just for example, it won't really be like you got to come up with this $20,000 if you don't have $20,000. But once you sell that house, now you got all this money. So really, more than likely, it's going to be pretty much coming out of that. But yeah, so that's an opportunity that you can do. You can use these contingencies to sweeten the deal, spice the deal up for these clients, for these buyers. Now, you don't necessarily have to initiate it, but if they initiate it, I'm saying to, try to agree with it, or counter something pretty close and work with them. Otherwise, you could lose the buyer if you don't agree to certain things. And last but not least, if I have any agents watching, I just wanted to, point out to you guys to make sure that you are explaining these things clearly to the clients, again, because these are things that are in the offers and the contract. These are written documents. You know, they're signing these things, they're putting their names on it, their signatures, and you know, if you're an agent, you already know, you've already seen these paperworks, and you should know how serious it is. So make sure you're explaining these things clearly. You know, you definitely want to explain it in a way better and, you know, bigger, better, and deeper than what I'm explaining to them now, because again, some of these things do vary by state. So please inform them and let them know, you know, this process, because they need it, you know, and how these contingencies work. I mentioned earlier about the ones where, you know, they can't just walk away smooth sailing. Sometimes there are consequences and fees, so please let them know what those are and when those can happen. Also, agents, make sure that you are helping them keep up with those deadlines, because again, those deadlines can be tedious, and you definitely want to make sure, you know, that is a known thing within the real estate field. We do say time is of the essence, so please make sure that you're managing and helping them out with those deadlines. But overall, you know, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, you know, not just for the clients, but, you know, what you do for the clients is helping yourself out as well. You want to make sure that you maintain a good reputation towards the clients and towards yourself, because, you know, if you mess something up with the clients, then, you know, you just never know. It's a free country. They could write reviews on you. The agents are out here getting sued. So you definitely want to make sure that you're keeping yourself knowledgeable on these things, and you're informing them the right information as well, so that you can prevent some of those legal disputes that come up and go on. So make sure that you guys are maintaining knowledge in these legal aspects, and, you know, following your brokers and what they're recommending, and to, you know, maintain good contact with these real estate attorneys, you know, and referring your clients to them as well for their information. So, you know, for their safety in these contracts. But yeah, you guys, that's all I have for everybody in this video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope it was beneficial to you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.